So I've been using the Fujifilm X-T4 for about the past 2 months, and I learned a lot about this camera, and it's not perfect, and that's okay. So I wanted to talk a little bit about this because a lot of people, I think, harp on cameras, or especially newer cameras and stuff like that, because they expect it to do everything, like literally like everything. So the Fujifilm X-T4 isn't perfect. It does about like 80 or 90% of what people expect it to do. And I kind of want to talk a little bit about what it hits, what it misses, and what you can kind of expect maybe if you're in the market for the X-T4 or you're considering buying any new camera in general. Because I don't think cameras are supposed to be perfect. Obviously we want them to be because we place a high value on art and what we're making, like photos and video wise, but that just isn't the reality of a lot of these cameras. So personally, I'll be keeping the Fujifilm X-T4 because it does everything I intended it to do, everything I need it for. I've been using it in the past several videos now, and it films all my B-roll, all my talking head portions and everything like that. So I have honestly very little complaints with this camera, but I can understand why people would be miffed at the qualms that this camera has, especially for the price point that it has, you know what I mean? Obviously take everything I say with a grain of salt because it is one person's opinion. This is from my experiences with the camera. This is not a tech or spec review or a comprehensive review. I'm just telling you guys what I think and what I know. So yeah. Let's go ahead and start with photography and how this camera performs in terms of photographic experience and stuff like that. And I can already say directly that I'd have no qualms with using this for photos. It shares the same sensor as many other Fujifilm cameras like the X-T3, X100V, XS10, etc. And because of that, I feel like it does a good enough job for pictures. Most of the upgrades for the X-T4 came for video, and it increased the capability of using this camera as a hybrid camera. And that's also where a lot of the errors came from as well, is in the video side of things, because Fujifilm is still upping their game in video. They're not quite there yet, but they are getting much better. So the only qualm or potential qualm that I see people having with this camera is the fully articulating screen. Now, obviously this is very useful feature, very useful option for video, but for taking pictures and stuff like that, I personally prefer, okay, for both photo and video, I personally prefer a tilt up screen. The fully articulating screen has come in handy when I need to film myself and stuff like that. But for the most part, if I were to choose, I would just have a tilting screen like the one on the X100V. I think that one is perfect for both photo and video mode. So it can be a little awkward shooting pictures with the fully articulating screen. But honestly, if you've had a camera that doesn't have a screen that pops out at all, then you'll be fine with this camera. Now, let's talk a little bit about video because this is where the Fujifilm X-T4 has some problems. And you've probably seen this in other videos on other review sites, especially when this camera was first released. It was getting a lot of flack from people because it wasn't perfect and it had a lot of problems. So let's talk about autofocus. Now, for, like I said, photographic side, autofocus on this camera is perfect. I think if you used older cameras and things like that, there is honestly no problem with autofocus capabilities with this camera. I've used it with the XF 18mm f2, which is one of Fuji's oldest lenses, and for photos it's like perfectly fine. I don't honestly think that you need anything better. I've failed and missed a lot more shots from my own negligence or poor handling of the camera than I have from this camera being like poor at autofocus, you know what I mean? Where autofocus seems to be a little bit more of a problem tends to be on the video side. Now, I use probably one of Fujifilm's best combinations with this camera, and that is the XF 16 to 55mm lens. And this lens works really well because it has a linear motor, so its autofocusing system is much better than the other Fujifilm lens lineups. But I've also noticed that the problem doesn't really lie in Fujifilm X-T4's autofocusing capabilities. Rather, it lies in the lenses in Fujifilm lineups. Many of them are slightly older, and their autofocus is more intended for photos, not so much for videos. So if you're expecting to use like the 23mm f2 or the 35 1.4 or whatever for video, then you'll probably be more or less disappointed. But here's why I don't think it's too much of a problem. Because this lens, it rarely misses, it rarely hunts, etc., etc. But if you want perfect focus, you should be manually focusing for video anyways, because autofocus for video is kind of a newer thing in like the film scheme. You know, we haven't always had autofocus. Even for big productions like movies and music videos, people still shoot with manual focus. And I understand they have like a focus lever, it makes things easier, but learning how to manual focus is a very important and very, very useful skill, especially when shooting video, because it eliminates any variation or any chance of your camera hunting. Like if you're shooting for an actual production or whatever, you don't want to take the chance with shooting with autofocus. You don't want to rely on your camera's autofocus system to, you know, get the shot done, because if you miss or the camera hunts even for a second, then the entire shot is ruined and it's over. So you should be learning manual focus. Honestly, it's much easier than people put it out to be, to focus pull and stuff like that. And I've shot manual focus in a lot of different situations with both the X-T4 and the X100V in certain situations where I'm filming myself. And it has worked out really, really well because I don't have to worry about hunting at all. So that's just my thoughts on it. Obviously, if you're looking for a camera, a video camera that has like near perfect video autofocus, then you'd probably be looking at Sony or Canon anyways, but their cameras have qualms of their own, right? No camera is perfect, and that's kind of, I guess, the point of this video, is that as long as the camera fills the niche and the wants and needs that you're intending to use it for, then that's perfectly okay. But no camera is gonna do everything perfectly. As long as it does what you need it to do, then it is a worthwhile purchase. Alright, let's go ahead and talk about IBIS a little bit, because IBIS on this camera was one of the most hyped features, especially when this camera was first coming out. It is the second Fujifilm camera to get IBIS right after the X-H1, and it's not amazing. It does its job relatively well, but it's not perfect. But then again, if you're buying this camera or any mirrorless camera or any like kind of handheld camera expecting it to have GoPro hypersmooth capabilities or gimbal-like capabilities, then you're in the wrong market, because they're not going to be able to achieve that kind of quality in the first place. So don't expect it to have any GoPro or gimbal-like qualities, just expect it to slightly smooth your video out. But even then, even with just those kind of standards, the X-T4 doesn't do a perfect job with IBIS. I honestly find it warping kind of a lot, especially on the wide end. Now, for photographic purposes, of course, the IBIS is perfect. So if you're trying to buy a camera for photographic purposes to shoot at like lower shutter speeds, you'll be fine with this camera. But I'm talking about for video. The IBIS on the video is not perfect, because even handheld shots or even super still shots where I'm holding the camera really, really still, I will get warping at the edges or just some weird kind of funky look. This is an relatively easy fix as well though. Honestly, you just have to toss on the warp stabilizer in Premiere, and a lot of these errors are fixed because they aren't that bad, you know what I mean? Now, I know a lot of people might complain about this because they consider any workaround to be like a hassle and stuff like that. Using the warp stabilizer in Premiere Pro is another workaround as well, and they want the camera to just do it all. And I understand that sentiment, I get it, but for the X-T4, that's just not how it is. Even in my last video I posted, I had a lot of B-roll of myself shooting Cal State Long Beach where I was taking photos, and a lot of the handheld shots, I had to use warp stabilizer to get it to look right. And even with the warp stabilizer being used, I find myself having this floating head effect on the camera, where it basically looks like you're holding the camera and it's kind of floating in water or something like that. That's how the stabilization looks after using IBIS on this and warp stabilizer in post. And this, of course, I've tried with IS boost mode on, I've tried with digital IS on as well, and they all create slightly different artifacts. So it's not perfect, but what I can say is that the IBIS is still better than the X100V handheld with warp stabilizer in post. You still are going to get a better result for the most part. Just don't expect it to be perfect. But it gets the job done for me. So that's why I'm still gonna use this camera. I'm still gonna own this camera. I'm still gonna shoot with this camera because that is the most important part. So takeaways from this video, I guess, is if you're looking for just a photographic camera, the X-T4 is not your bet. You might as well go with the X-T3 or even like some of the older versions like X-T2 or X Pro 2. Those do just well enough for photography. You don't need anything like this. Most of the upgrades in this camera came for video anyways. If you were looking to buy this camera for video purposes, then your best options in terms of lenses are probably the 16 to 55 millimeter, the one I have. Maybe even the 18 to 55 I heard has pretty good autofocus with this camera, but also consider the 18 millimeter f1.4 because that has a new linear motor focusing system. Obviously do your research, but if the linear motor on that lens is anything like the lens on this one, then it'll probably do well enough, you know what I mean? If you were looking for more stable considerations, then I would consider buying a gimbal or, you know, just not using this camera expecting to be able to do pans and crazy stuff like that. And honestly, if you don't need any of the added features the X-T4 has in terms of video bitrate and things like that, then the XS10 is actually a really, really good bang for your buck type camera in Fujifilm's lineup. Anyways, I hope you guys found this video helpful. I think everyone expected this camera to be like the camera, the perfect hybrid camera, especially when it came out. But we shouldn't expect cameras to be perfect in any such way or situation. That's just never going to be the case. We're always going to find faults or qualms with cameras, no matter what. You know what I mean? So pay attention to your wants and needs before buying a camera like this. Make sure you know what you're going to be using it for and you don't expect it to do anything crazy outside of its limitations. And that's all I can really say. So if you like this video, please go ahead and like the video down below, subscribe to my channel for more Fujifilm stuff and photography, videography journey type stuff as well. I also want to announce that I do have a website now, andrepell.com, where I post photos and photo journeys, short story type stuff. So I'm really excited for that. So check that out if you're interested in short story blog format stuff. And I will see you guys in another video. Thank you guys for watching. Peace.